Welcome to the History Flames channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this one. This photograph was taken in 1964 at a hotel in Florida. The hotel owner is seen pouring acid into the pool to protest against black people swimming in it. This horrifying image illustrates the cruel and inhumane extent of racial segregation during that time. This photograph was taken during the Civil Rights Movement. A black man carries a sign that reads, "Give us American rights," while a white man holds a sign that says, "Go home, Negro." This striking image symbolizes the racial tensions in America and the resistance faced in the struggle for equality. This photograph shows the horrific treatment endured by an African American slave during the era of slavery. The metal collar and chains around the man's neck and head were designed as a cruel punishment tool to prevent escape. This image starkly reveals the inhumane nature of slavery and the terrible extent of racial injustice. This photograph was taken during the 1963 civil rights protests in Birmingham, Alabama. Police Chief Bull Connor infamously used fire hoses and attack dogs against protesters. The image became a symbol of the violence faced by black people in their fight for equality and sparked widespread public outrage. This photograph was taken in Detroit in 1943. An African-American man, brutally beaten by white individuals, is forced to pose with his attackers. This image starkly reveals the widespread and brutal nature of racial violence and discrimination during that time. This photograph was taken during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. A black woman chooses to walk instead of riding the segregated buses. The box on her head and the items she carries symbolize the resilience and determination that became emblematic of the civil rights movement. This photograph was taken in 1939 in Oklahoma City. A black man is seen drinking from a water fountain labeled "Colored." The signs next to him reflect a time when white and black people were forced to use separate facilities. This image starkly illustrates the systematic nature of segregation in America. This photograph shows members of the Ku Klux Klan, a racist terrorist organization that operated in America, dressed in white robes and pointed hoods. These individuals perpetrated violence and terror against black people, Jews, Catholics, and other minority groups. This image symbolizes the dark face of racial hatred and fanaticism in America. This photograph was taken at a zoo in Memphis. The sign reads, "No white people allowed in zoo today," indicating that certain days were designated for black people to visit the zoo, restricting access for whites. This highlights how pervasive and deeply ingrained racial segregation was in everyday life. This photograph shows the famous human rights advocate Malcolm X holding a newspaper detailing the shooting of unarmed black men by the Los Angeles police. Malcolm X was known as a powerful voice against racial injustice and police brutality. This image has become a symbol of the racial tensions and activism in 1960s America. This photograph was taken during a labor rights march in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968. The man holding the "I am a man" sign became a powerful symbol of the demand for dignity and respect for black workers. This image is one of the most iconic moments of the civil rights movement and the fight for human dignity. This photograph shows the entrance of a movie theater during segregation in America, where black people were only allowed in certain areas. The men standing under the colored sign highlight the deep-rooted racial segregation of the time. This image vividly illustrates the impact of racism on everyday life during that era. This photograph was taken on November 24, 1956, in Montgomery, Alabama. A woman watches as robed Ku Klux Klan members walk down the street before a cross-burning rally later that night. This image is a stark reminder of the racial terror and the constant threats faced by black people in their daily lives. This photograph illustrates the impact of segregation on daily life in America. The sign "Colored Dining Room" reflects how African Americans were forced to accept inferior facilities compared to whites. Such structures are a tangible reminder of the racial injustice prevalent during that era. This photograph was taken in 1965 at a women's prison in New Orleans, Louisiana. A woman points to a sign labeled "White Female," reflecting the racial segregation that was enforced even in prisons. This image illustrates how deeply racial discrimination was embedded in the societal structure. This photograph shows protesters opposing the desegregation efforts in America during the 1960s. The individuals hold signs reading "Close Mixed Schools" and "Communist Jews behind race mixing," displaying a hateful attitude towards racial integration and the Jewish community. This image highlights the deep racism and anti-Semitism prevalent during that era. This photograph shows an African-American soldier named Louis Martin who fought for the Union during the American Civil War. Martin lost both his arm and leg in the war, symbolizing the great sacrifices made in the fight for freedom and equality. This image is a powerful reminder of the lasting scars of war and racial injustice. This image combines a historical photograph with a modern message. The old photo of a black woman carrying a white child on her back has been used as a symbol of slavery and racial inequality. The Black Lives Matter EP title on the image emphasizes the importance of the ongoing anti-racism movement in the modern era. This visual serves as a powerful reminder of the persistent racial injustices from history to the present. This photograph, taken in the 1940s, shows a segregated military police station marked colored. A black soldier is seen posing on a motorcycle. This image symbolizes the racial segregation and the injustices faced by black soldiers within the U.S. military. This photograph was taken in Alabama in 1956. A family orders ice cream from the colored side of a segregated ice cream stand. This image is a poignant reminder of how pervasive and normalized racial segregation was in America. This photograph was taken in 1965 by Leonard Freed. The sign "Service for Colored" at window reflects a time of segregation, when black people could only receive service through a window. This image captures the harsh reality of racial segregation in America and its profound impact on society. This photograph was taken on a bus during a time of segregation in America. The sign "This part of the bus for the colored race" forced black passengers to sit at the back of the bus. This image illustrates the inhumane treatment of black people on public transportation and the profound impact of racial segregation on everyday life. This photograph was taken in the 1950s in America and shows an all-black classroom. Due to segregation, black students were often forced to attend schools with poor conditions. This image highlights the racial inequality in education and the systemic segregation of that era. This photograph highlights the racial segregation on buses in America. Black passengers were forced to sit at the back of the bus. This image became an important symbol of the civil rights movement, especially with the bus boycotts initiated by brave individuals like Rosa Parks. This poster announces a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968, at the Southern Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Titled "I Have a Dream," the poster symbolizes Dr. King's fight for racial equality and justice. Tragically, Dr. King was assassinated just hours after this planned speech. This photograph from the 1950s shows a white Christian mob violently attacking an African-American man. The man, defenseless and beaten in the crowd, painfully illustrates the widespread nature of racism and violence during that time. Images like this reveal the brutal face of racial injustice. This photograph depicts the horrors of slavery in Africa during the colonial period. Two African men are shown holding a prisoner chained to metal stakes. Such scenes starkly reveal the inhumane nature of slavery and the brutal violence inflicted upon indigenous people by colonial powers.
This photograph, taken in the 1950s in the American South, highlights the racial segregation enforced under Jim Crow laws. The white and colored signs represent a time when black and white people were forced to use separate water fountains. Images like this reflect the long and brutal history of racial discrimination in America.
This photograph was taken in the 1940s in America and illustrates the impact of segregation on daily life. A child drinks from a water fountain under the sign "Colored," reflecting a time when black people were forced to use separate facilities from whites. This image is a symbol of the normalization of racial segregation during that era. This photograph was taken during a time of widespread segregation in America. It shows a black man looking at a job advertisement that reads, "Help wanted, white only." This image highlights the racial job discrimination and the challenges black Americans faced in finding employment. This photograph was taken in 1964 on a ferry on the Mississippi River. The section labeled "Colored" shows two individuals sitting in an area designated for black people, reflecting the enforced separation from whites at that time. This image highlights how pervasive and normalized racial segregation was. This photograph was taken in 1964 at a courthouse in Clinton, Louisiana. An African-American man is seen emerging from a restroom marked "White Men Only." Scenes like this illustrate how deeply segregation permeated every aspect of daily life in America. This photograph was taken in 1940 at a bus terminal in Durham, North Carolina. The sign "Colored Waiting Room" symbolizes a time when black people were forced to wait in separate areas from whites. This image is a stark example of the systemic discrimination and injustice of that era. This photograph showcases the ugly face of racism in America. The signs indicate that black people and other groups targeted by racist slurs were prohibited from entering the building. This image is a stark reminder of racial hatred and discrimination, representing one of history's darkest chapters. This photograph shows a child protesting racial integration in schools during the 1960s in America. The boy holds a sign that reads, "We won't go to school with Negroes." This image symbolizes the deep-seated racism and the resistance displayed by white students to attending school alongside black students during that era.